Hi everyone, welcome to the Pet Travel Guy podcast. We're doing a series of videos talking about the requirements for specific countries. And one of our most popular destinations is Australia, so this is what we're going to talk about today. Now, the Australians have very strict import regulations, and today I'm talking specifically about UK to Australia. And there are sort of certain steps that you've got to go through. First, I should probably point out that I'm only talking about dogs and cats today. Again, very tight regulations on what animals can be imported to Australia and what can't. So if you have anything that's a little bit more exotic, please get in touch and we can discuss your particular requirement. So for dogs and cats, in general terms, you're looking at 7 months veterinary preparation and then quarantine on arrival. Now, quarantine can either be 10 or 30 days. And there's only one quarantine station in Australia at the moment, and that's in Melbourne. So irrespective of where you're going to live in Australia, your pet will have to enter Australia in Melbourne and spend some time in quarantine there. Now, I'll talk about the difference between 10 and 30 days in a moment. It's dependent on certain steps in the preparation, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. But as always, first place to start, microchip your pet. Hopefully they're all microchipped anyway, but that's the first place to start. Then get the rabies vaccine, and that really starts that 7 months preparation going. Once we've had the rabies vaccine, what we can do, if we're going to try and target the 10-day quarantine, is we get 2 OV66 identity checks for your pet. Now, an OV66 is essentially just an official veterinarian, i.e. a government-approved vet that is approved for export paperwork that's now registered with the Australian authorities so that they can do these ID checks. And provided we get 2 independent ID checks done by independent vets, not working in the same practice, not working with the same veterinary company, done after the rabies vaccine, they then send that registration and identity check over to Australia and they send us a copy as well. As long as we've done all the other steps, but we've got those 2 OV66 checks done, then your pet will only hopefully have to spend 10 days in quarantine. If we don't do those 2 checks, then it's 30 days, unless your pet has come from Australia originally, in which case, as long as we can provide proof of that export from Australia, then again, it's 10 days. But if you haven't come off from Australia, if you don't do the OV66 checks, then your pet will have to spend 30 days in quarantine in Melbourne. So, rabies vaccine, we're then waiting a month. In that month, we're doing the OV66 checks. Once we've got the checks done, after 30 days or a month, we can do the rabies blood test. From the date that the blood sample reaches the laboratory, a clock of 180 days starts to tick. And it's 180 days before your pet can leave the UK to travel to Australia. That's the minimum. So the blood tests are valid for a year, so it can be longer than that. So we advise people to get that done in preparation, even if you're still waiting for final sign-off of visas or accommodation or whatever it may be. But that 180 days is vital, and that starts ticking. So once you've had the blood test done, we wait to get the results back. When they come in, our vets will do an RNAT declaration, rabies neutralizing antibody titer test declaration, and we send that declaration and various other documents, rabies vaccine, etc., off to the Australian government to get the import permit for you. Now, import permits, we've had them back in 48 hours, we've had them back in 9 weeks. It depends on the time of year and how busy they are, but we're doing it well in advance. But until we've got the import permit through, we can't apply for the quarantine space. And quarantine is a sort of absolute finite booking. You can't ordinarily slip by a day or two. It's not like a hotel. There could be somebody coming into that kennel or cattery as soon as you leave after 10 days. So sometimes if they're quiet, they will allow us to slip if for whatever reason. But generally, we're trying to target a specific export date to hit that quarantine entry date. Now, in that 180 days, there's not a lot to do for the majority of it. It's only when we get sort of 2 months out, really, and then specifically within 45 days of export that we have to then start doing some additional tests and treatments. Now, cats are very lucky, they don't need any of these additional blood tests. Dogs do, depending on what treatments they've had, whether they've been desexed, whether they've ever been to Africa. It depends on how many of the blood tests they'll need, maximum of 4. Many cases we can get away with only 1. So if your pet's been desexed, never been to Africa, and has had the leptospirosis treatments as a matter of course in the UK, then it's only one blood test. But again, we'll work with you to go through the specific requirement for your pet. As I say, cats don't need these blood tests, so they're very lucky. Again, the last thing we're looking at then is treatments. We always advise that you keep up the standard vaccines for your pets in the UK, including lepto for dogs and kennel cough and the feline equivalents for your cat, so that they remain valid throughout the term of your quarantine in Melbourne. And as I say, as long as you've had the lepto in your dog, then you won't require additional blood tests, or one of the additional blood tests. And then really it just comes down to the internal and external parasite treatments. Now, for external parasite treatments, and these have to be administered by a vet and entered onto either your pet's vaccine records or a letter on practice headed paper with the treatment, when it was given, who it was given by, etc., on there. They've got to be treated by the vet. You can't just go and buy it yourself in the vet shop or order it online and deliver it. You can't do that. It's got to be done by a vet, unfortunately. But the first external treatment has to be more than 30 days before departure. The internal parasite treatments, you need two treatments minimum. They've got to be a minimum of 14 days apart and within the last 45 days. What we tend to advise our clients is that we will do the final parasite treatments when we've collected your pet, but just as a belt and braces approach, we recommend that you do two yourselves. So we'd start more than a month out, do a second one after maybe 2.5 weeks, and then we'll do another one 2.5 weeks after that. It's belt and braces. You can get away with just doing the two as long as you time it perfectly, but the efficacy of these treatments tends to be only 28 days. It's not a full month. So we've just got to watch those dates to make sure that your pet remains covered and is eligible for entry to PEQ, because the Australians are very strict, understandably, on pets, animals coming onto Australian soil. So as always, what we try and do is we'll collect your pet the day or two before travel. We'll bring them into our kennels and cattery near the airport. Our vets will see them, do the final examinations, do the final parasite treatments, complete the export health certificate in conjunction with the import permit, and then they'll stay overnight with us, where we can manage their food intake, their exercise and their sleep. It's a very relaxed, calm environment, so that we go over to the airport the following day for check-in, and everything's very calm. They've had a nice walk before they've started, and it's nice and calm, as I say. Various routes to Australia. We tend to use Emirates or Qatar, so via Dubai or Doha. We can also use Sri Lankan via Colombo. They've got great facilities in all three airports for the transition. We recommend that you have a longer transit through those airports than a shorter one. There are flights that mean you only have a few hours, but that doesn't really give your pet a break. We'll always recommend a transit of a bit longer, so that your pet gets taken back to the pet facility, taken out of their Sky Kennel, allowed to stretch their legs, given some food and water, looked after, have a bit of a fuss and attention before they start their second leg into Melbourne. On arrival in Melbourne, the guys from the quarantine facility, PEQ, post-entry quarantine, will collect your pets from Melbourne Airport, transfer them across to the quarantine facility. Generally takes them a day or more to let us know that pets have arrived. But as always in pet shipping, no news is good news. If there were anything wrong, they'd let us know straight away. So we then book the post PEQ release appointment, and our partners in Australia will go in, collect your pet from quarantine station just outside Melbourne, a place called Mickleham, and then either deliver them locally if you're living in Melbourne, or you can collect them from quarantine yourself if you're local, or we can arrange onward flights anywhere in Australia so that your pets arrive at your home nice and fresh. Now, just a little tip, if you can, I'd send your pet slightly ahead of you, so maybe sort of 5-6 days ahead of you. And what that means is that you can pack up your house. The pets aren't getting overly anxious by watching you pack suitcases and things. If you're having to leave your accommodation slightly earlier and you're going to stay with family or friends, then you're not having to worry about where your pet's going to stay, and it gets them into the routine of quarantine. You can then travel out with your family, get yourself into your new home in Australia, and 2-3 days later, your pet will be delivered home to you. So they leave a more settled home and they come back into a more settled home. It's just a way of sort of reducing any form of anxiety for your pet in what is quite a long journey. So that's Australia in a nutshell. 7 months preparation, rabies vaccine, get the 2 OV checks, a month later rabies blood test, and that starts the 6 months going. Possibly additional blood tests and treatments, and then quarantine on arrival. Please get in touch. We can happy to answer any questions on whether it's your specific pet requirements or whereabouts in Australia you're going. We can give you advice. We can help you with OV66 selection. Get in touch and let's start the journey. Thanks for watching.